Well, here I am in Washington, D.C. on the Capitol Mall, and this is the setting for today's Backshed as we talk about American history. We're going to talk a little bit about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. What a great setting today. Welcome. It's episode number 102. Today is Monday, April 11th, 2022. Good to have you here. All right, I am standing here in beautiful Washington, D.C. with Steve Goodyear. And Steve, you are, I can introduce you a lot of ways.
Okay.
But you're one of my kids' favorite teachers.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
That's very kind.
So we're here with Summit Christian School.
Yes, absolutely.
In D.C. trip. Let's talk a little bit first.
Okay.
My son is a ninth grader. He doesn't go to Summit anymore. Why are we here with you?
Okay, so the last DC trip I was going to take was in 2020, and 2 weeks before our flight date, that's when everything started shutting down. And so for the past 2 years, we haven't been able to go to DC. And so I opened up this trip to any previous students. If they wanted to join on with my 8th graders, they'd be more than welcome to come. And it was actually really cool because it's the first time our entire bus has been nothing but Summit.
That's Summit, right?
And so it's a glorious thing.
Which it's really funny because you used to come along with Capital, and at our hotel, Capital is here, and they're staying in the same hotel.
Yeah. They actually just left. They're on their way to Williamsburg now. Yeah.
Which we did the day before. But I was thinking for today, which would be kind of fun. I grew up in an environment where I was taught American history. I was taught to love our country. I got to come here as a student and several times since, and I love the United States. I love what we're about. I'm grateful for the fact that I was raised as an American. I think my dad always just pounded that into me, that it's the grace of God that you're able to be raised here in this country. Yeah. And yet, as I got into college, I came across a lot of people that were like, well, there's the United States isn't a Christian nation. That was the first time I actually came across that concept. Okay. And I really wrestled with that a lot. Yeah. And then even concepts again that would say that we'll just wrestle with that a little bit. Okay. So I'm gonna the first thing I want to ask you, because you're a history teacher. Okay. Right. Okay. And at a Christian school. Yeah. Yeah. And grew up in the church and all that.
It's true.
Could we say unequivocally today that the United States is a Christian nation?
No, that'd be really hard to say. Right. that'd be very difficult to say.
I think this is a softball.
That's an easy one. Right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's obvious. I've had somebody describe to me, a pastor friend of mine said, we in the United States really need to stop thinking of, or in the church even in the United States, need to stop thinking of us as the church in Acts and start to look more in Daniel. Okay. Of kind of living in a time of almost exile. Right.
Yeah, because I mean, even Christian, basically the assumed Christian beliefs have gone from kind of like 80% accepted to 20% accepted. Right. So we've had a huge shift over the last 30 years.
Right. Yeah. And that's fair. I think everybody, as Christians, we can accept that whether we like it or not. It's a reality that we live in, and I think part of raising our own kids is that we teach them how to live in a culture without embracing it.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we got lots of common ground so far.
Yeah. Well, because even I'll step in, because even in Philippians, when Paul's talking to the Philippian church, I mean, he's talking about their citizenship. Right. Because being a citizen of Philippi was a big deal. They had all the Roman rights and privileges. Right. But he's like, that's not your first and primary identity. Your main identity is actually a part of God's kingdom. You are a citizen of his kingdom. And those are the rules and the privileges that you need to focus on more.
Right. And I think it's really easy to lose track of that.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I even think the last 2 years in living through COVID, taught us to be more polarized and stand up for our rights. And I think even just as a church, we kind of wrestled with that going through that season of, are we standing up for our rights? Do we, are we doing the Romans 13, submitting to authority?
Right.
What weight does the Constitution have in, in its authority compared with the authority of God and Scripture? And that's not what we were going to talk about today.
Okay, sorry, we got a little off. Okay,
deep, but those are some of the things. Like for you guys that watch along, I wrestle with a lot of these things because you wrestle with them, and because people come to me and wrestle with how we approach things as a church, and I think it's a good wrestling. But I to kind of bring things back to where I was hoping we'd go today.
Okay,
so,
sorry.
Again, as the MC, I'm kind of taking things all over the place.
It's all good.
Because I'm distracted. I'm looking around.
It's a beautiful, I mean, come on.
Right? There's a Washington
We're in D.C. There's a lots to see.
Right there. American History Museum's over there.
Yeah.
Natural History. And the
Capitol all the way down there. Yeah.
So plenty to be distracted by. But I think it's fun to just go back. Yesterday we went to Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
And we were at George Washington's home. The day before that, we were at Monticello.
Yes.
And we're at Jefferson's home. So this is where I want to bring you in as my resident history expert.
Okay.
You've been here how many times?
This is my 8th trip.
8th trip,
yeah.
leading students here. So we go from Jefferson's home to Washington's home.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have questions about the faith of each of these men.
Okay.
And is one of them a Christian and the other a deist? Are both of them Christians? What do you know? Start with Jefferson.
Starting with Jefferson. Okay, so he was definitely a founding father, very important to our nation, Declaration of Independence, president, governor of Georgia for a while, our ambassador to France.
He liked France.
He did. He loved France.
Yeah.
He brought back macaroni and cheese.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, that was something that he discovered in France,
enjoyed
it, brought it back over. Yeah. Watch, somebody's going to be like, no, Mr. Goodyear, that didn't happen. I heard it at Monticello a couple of years back, so
the tour guide said it.
Yeah, tour guide said it. I'm taking it as truth.
Right.
But overall, as far as his faith, he was a man of primarily education, in my mind. He respected the Bible. He loved the words of Jesus, so much so that he was our very early version of cut and paste, where during his presidency, he actually was studying the Gospels to find Jesus's words, cut them out, and to paste them in a blank book so that they were all just the sayings of Jesus in one collection.
Interesting.
Which he referred to that to his teachings and morals of Jesus Christ. They call it today the Jefferson Bible. He would never have called it that, to be quite honest.
Okay.
So he actually did appreciate the teachings of Jesus very much. And yet he was also a student of the Enlightenment.
Right.
So his notions of the supernatural, he had a little bit of harder time with that, which actually, those two conflicting beliefs actually helped out in a lot of ways. He wrote the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom.
Okay.
Because in Virginia, under England, if you weren't Anglican,
right,
you could get in trouble
Church of England.
For preaching gospel,
right,
if you weren't licensed by the Church of England.
Okay.
And so he was like, that's ridiculous.
Right.
People should be able to study God's word and believe as they see fit. Those things are like all great from Jefferson.
Right. I mean, it affords us the freedom in this country to be able to preach the gospel without persecution.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Legally.
Yeah. And then there's all the other side of Jefferson where people look to a lot of his writings to see that he is a deist. He does definitely believe in God. You cannot deny that. But whether or not he believes that Jesus was divine, you're not going to find a statement where he says that or anything like that.
So he could have been someone who would have said Jesus was a great teacher.
Absolutely.
Therefore, we are going to take these teachings of his and apply them
most definitely.
in our nation.
Yeah, yeah.
But not in his heart.
Yeah, and honestly, most men during this time period would do that. Judging an individual's faith is really a hard thing to do, but all of these men, when they would debate, they would bring in the wisdom of the Bible into those debates. We saw it at St. John's Church, where you would hear them bringing in ideas, both from Scripture or from Shakespeare. But they were throwing them all in their arguments of why we should do the things that we do.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So that's Jefferson.
Yes.
We visited Monticello. Fascinating to me.
Oh.
Right?
Beautiful home.
Beautiful home up on the top of a hill.
Yep.
It's, as by the bus, it's 2.5 hours or so south from here.
It's in Charlottesville. Yeah.
Charlottesville.
Yeah.
But no ocean nearby, no water nearby.
No.
Just
kind of
the
massive
rolling
plantations.
Plantations.
Yeah.
Below. And fairly ornate.
Yes, he was very extravagant in his lifestyle.
So let's, before we get to Washington, because I think this is such a good contrast to make.
Okay.
It would seem to me, by what we were learning along the way on the tour, that Jefferson was kind of in a quest. I don't know if quest for wealth is the right way to put it, but he valued.
So
I would say into trouble a lot. With
I would
money,
say
right?
he was in a quest for experience.
Okay.
He wanted to make things grander. He wanted to. He kept track of the weather at his home for like 30 years.
Okay.
He just had a thirst for experiencing and doing things. So yeah, unfortunately, when he does die, he's in debt.
He's in debt
Because he has spent all of his money on trying to make his house very fascinating and unique. It's very highly influenced by Greek and Roman sculpture. He loved all that stuff. Yeah. And
he had a lot of wine and beer.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
It was a bit. It was a bit opulent to me.
Yeah.
There in his house, there is a wine.
It's a dumbwaiter.
A dumbwaiter.
Yeah.
Like this elevator that comes up from the basement that brings bottles of wine.
Yeah, built into the side of the fireplace so that it was very, very secretive. But then, there's another bottle. Here we go.
Right? And so it seems like there was just a lot of partying that went on there.
It's very possible. Yeah. I know.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
They understand. They're good.
Yeah.
So we had Jefferson, right?
Yeah.
And then we come down. We end up along the Potomac at Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
Right, home of George Washington, which was fun after the tour yesterday to kind of query the crowd,
right?
Everyone on the bus of where people would have preferred to live, whether the ornate Monticello, Jefferson, top of the hill plantation, or the George Washington, Mount Vernon along the Potomac. A little more, I think, simple in design.
Yeah, to a degree. His house was still a mansion for his time.
True.
He had expanded that house throughout his lifetime, and so he had created quite a large living space for himself, but probably more traditional.
Okay.
Whereas Jefferson is more extravagant, doing things that are very unique. George Washington is a little bit more traditional, and it is a little bit more simple. So while Jefferson is going to pay for stonemasons to come and build him just the right pillars, George Washington is going to make his wood house look like stone.
Right.
Because that's much more economical.
I did not know that. From when I visited there before, I had no idea that was not stone on the front of the house. And
it looks like stone.
It's facade, right?
Yeah. It's just paint, plaster, and a little bit of sand, and it makes it look just like stone. Yeah.
But it is not.
Yeah.
So, and whatever you do, don't knock on it.
Yeah, no, they don't want you to do that.
I got in trouble.
Yeah, they don't want you to break the plaster.
Yes, yeah. So, anyway, but that's nothing to do with Washington State.
Yeah, much different type of living style. Both of these men had very large farms, large plantations, but Washington's down on the river, so fishing is also another resource for him. But yeah, as a man, much more simple to a great extent.
Right.
Honestly, his primary desire throughout most of the second half of his life was just to go home. But when his country needed him, he was willing to let that go and serve. Which
is a big deal. When you look at that all the way around, there was a man who for the sake of this country, which was a very young, not even a country
Right.
yet.
Right.
I mean, he's willing to put his family on the line
Mm-hmm.
for that. I mean, sacrifices we just don't see today.
Right.
I mean, we are seeing some of that right now in Ukraine, I would say. So let's dig into his faith a little bit.
Okay.
It would seem to me the evidence is pretty strong.
I mean, his granddaughter wrote about it and said, I don't see how anybody can doubt his Christianity and his faith.
Right.
Because he was a man of regular prayer. We've got prayer journals of George Washington, even from his time in the French and Indian War. And he was a regular for church. And it was just one of those things that everybody who spoke about him, even Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, was like, here's a man who actually has and lives out the faith for as much power as he had. I'm not quoting, I apologize.
Yeah,
I don't have it memorized. But for as much as power and influence that guy had, he never used it for himself. He only and ever used it for the good of the people around him, including his nation.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, there's something really key to that right there, because I've heard a lot of conversation recently, especially when you see the uber rich, as we'll call them today, just losing it with their money and their power, and to see some say, capitalism is a bad system, right?
Okay.
Now, what I'm getting at is.
You want me to quote Andrew Carnegie and his Gospel of Wealth? No, I'm sorry. You go back to okay.
I like
okay,
that.
Keep going.
No. What I'm thinking about though is I think the founding fathers realized that you could not have this kind of system without a moral moral authority.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Oh man, I wish I had all the quotes off the top of my head. But I mean, basically, like they say numerous times that if you do not have that base of morality, none of this works.
Right.
None of it works. It all falls apart. And again, for these guys, when they're thinking morality, they're thinking a biblical moral system.
That was their context at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you look at today's culture and you talk about a generalized morality, that could be the completely flip-flop.
Oh, sure, right. But they weren't dealing with that kind of a mindset. For them, when they're talking about morals, they're talking about biblical morals.
Biblical morals.
Yeah, that was the foundation for a lot of what these guys were doing at the origin of our nation.
So anything else on Washington?
I just like the fact that he's a man who, again, with all that power given, he's willing to lay it down.
Right.
He's a guy who set the standard for the two-term presidency.
Right.
Because that was not in law until after
FDR.
The tradition was broken. FDR broke the tradition.
Right. I mean, we're over there last night in the pouring rain.
Yes, at the FDR Memorial. Yeah.
And you're looking at the guy that was elected 4 times.
Yeah.
In the presidency.
Yeah.
13 years. Right. Something like that.
Yeah, because he died within I believe the first year of his fourth term. Yeah.
But Washington was willing to just say, no one man should.
Yeah.
People would have made him a king.
And even when they were talking about titles for the president, I mean, some people came up with some opulent titles that were like big and grand, and he was like, let's stick with just Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Keep it simple.
I think of humility.
Yes.
From everything I can learn. And it struck me today as we're looking right down the mall here at the Capitol, and as we looked up in the rotunda to the very top of the Capitol dome.
Right.
And they have him painted in there. I mean, it's a fascinating. I'll tell you what, when I edit this later, I will put a picture of the painting in the top of the rotunda there on this.
Because there he is sitting on a cloud, staring down at the people. Yeah.
I think he would have
probably
not liked that.
Well, and again, their intention with the Capitol is they wanted to bury him there.
Right.
They wanted him to be at the very center and heart of this nation. That's where they wanted George Washington's body to be because of how important and essential he was. First in war, first in peace, first in the heart of his countrymen is how he was described. and that was right at the time of his death. He was described that way, and so he was a man that everybody looked up to,
Right.
and yet he was a man that did not look down on others. So he said no. He said, I'm going to be buried at home. That's where I want to be.
Right.
It was in his will, and his family actually had to kind of like fight to be like, no, that's not what he
Yeah.
wanted.
Okay, let's talk for a second. He was a praying man.
Yes.
And
Yeah, we
there
have
are
journals.
Journals and
Yeah,
journals of
of his
that.
prayers.
I visited Valley Forge many years ago, and
That's
there's a, for lack of a better word, a statue, a giant monument of him down on his knees in prayer.
Yeah.
At Valley Forge.
Yeah.
And I think there may be some paintings commissioned of that.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah, I mean,
I think he learned he had to be, to a certain degree. There was a story, and it was mentioned both in his own personal journals and also somebody else's, referring to a battle from the French and Indian War. I talked about this on the bus,
Yeah.
where he was being shot at by French and Native Americans during the French and Indian War, and all the other commanders on the horses were taken out.
Yes.
And even for George Washington himself, 2 horses shot out from under him. And that's what he specifically writes in his journal. He's like, I had 2 horses shot out from under me, but he would get on another horse, and he kept on leading the men. Even Braddock, who was like the general, he was the guy who was actually in charge. He was fatally wounded, didn't die on the battlefield, but he died from his wounds, I believe, within a couple of weeks after that battle. And when it was all over and George Washington had actually led the men in retreat, I'm pretty sure, he had 4 bullet holes in his jacket.
in his jacket.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So,
And right there, he was like, he described it as a moment of divine providence.
divine providence. And we all, if you were watching last week with Juliana Law on there, who was telling stories from Ukraine and the war there, she was telling a story of that they're literally seeing the Russian army turn on itself and
Man.
destroy themselves at certain points along the way. They're crediting it to the hand of God, right?
Okay.
And that's, and that it immediately, my mind went there when I heard this story about Washington.
Oh yeah.
Because he was all about.
He had a number of narrow escapes in his life that he shouldn't have gotten away. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the gist of things. Is I really wanted to just go, it's easy to look backwards in our nation and to say, oh, well, some of the founding fathers, they weren't Christians, and so, this, that, and the other. But I think it's fair to say our nation has a very clear Christian heritage.
Yes.
In its foundation.
Yeah. It would
influence.
Yeah, it would be hard to deny, because that was the primary influence of most of these men, just in their own upbringing.
Yeah.
So church was a central part of society. The Bible was something that you knew and were familiar with, and so it couldn't help but influence all the decisions that they made.
So let's go off script here for a second.
Okay.
What do we do with that today? We're living in a post-Christian society.
Okay.
We have a culture that has morals that are literally flip-flopped, where they say what is right is what I think is wrong, and all the same stuff.
Yeah.
What do we do with that?
We remain faithful.
Right.
We remain faithful.
Do we try to resurrect the past?
I don't know how you can resurrect the past. That would be like trying to bring back Washington and restart over. God in His providence, again, He's guiding all of history in a direction.
Right.
And for as much as we would like to control the events around us, He does. And so when it comes down to it, we remain faithful to Him, and it's about following His will, not trying to make Him enact our will. Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do. And again, it takes that humility, like George Washington had, of just actually being willing to do what is asked of us.
On an individual basis.
On an individual basis, most definitely.
Yeah.
And that takes
where it
relationship with
starts.
God to even have a idea of that. I mean, you can read scripture, absolutely, but it's the leading of the Holy Spirit. That's what you have to tune your ears to so that you know where you should be and what you should be doing.
Right. And I think it's fair to say today, like, I can't, as a follower of Christ, I should not necessarily expect our government to be following along with where our founding fathers put this 230,
Well,
40, 50 years ago.
So if I can take it back,
Okay,
right? So
take it back.
do we want to go back to what Jefferson was living in, where if you were not a member of the Anglican Church, you did not have a say in government? Because that's what he was looking at, and he was saying, this is a problem.
Right.
And so religious freedom became something that he championed.
Yep.
And we have benefited from that. That we can, as Christians, there's not one church that you must go to, but at the same time, there is only one God by which we are saved.
Yeah. So I'm not going to put my
I
trust
should have looked at you guys while I said all of that.
Oh, dude, I've never called you dude before. That was that was good. That was really good. What's your favorite place here?
My favorite place here is Washington's home. I love going to Mount Vernon. Beautiful view, and it's got all the pieces of it because it's an actual historical site. It's got a great museum, and it's a working institution. You can see them fish. You can see the blacksmith working. Like it's got all of those pieces of history that you want to. Plus, you get to walk by the key to the Bastille.
You get the key to the Bastille.
That is original to his house. I mean, we were told yesterday that he actually designed the case that it is held in, and it's still the original. Still the original.
Now we could get
that kind of stuff makes me go, oh.
Now we could have quite a conversation about the Bastille and French independence.
We could,
but we're not going to today.
And Jefferson was a fan of that.
Jefferson was a fan.
Yeah.
And just so you all know, my birthday is Bastille Day. Just for the
that's a fun one. Nice.
Random piece of trivia there. I think my favorite, I've got to stick with Smithsonian Air and Space Museum.
Air and Space?
Yep.
Now, Mall Air and Space, or are you talking Udvar Hazy?
I'm talking about Udvar Hazy, where we're going to go tomorrow.
Awesome. And it's going to be my first time. I'm looking forward to going.
It's face to face with a blackbird.
That's so cool.
Right? It's a cool spot. But Air and Space Museum right there. It's amazing. You can see the Spirit of 76 there, Linda explained. But
it's under construction.
But
so we don't get to go in.
So we don't get to go there. Instead, we get to hang out with you all in the mall.
Yeah.
And I think this has been good. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you very much for
investing
into us, for being a part of coming to Sunrise. Our kids are in our youth group, and that's been a lot of fun. And looking forward to it.
Awesome. Very cool.
All right, you guys. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week. I've got a fun one for you. Next week on Backshed is going to be Dan Canoin is going to join me. Dan goes to our church, and he recently wrote a book, and it is I call it a devotional book, although it's this thick and it's good size. And this thing is the culmination of a lot of teaching and writing that he's been doing over several years to put into, I think it's a year's worth of daily devotions, and it's called Useful to the Master. You don't want to miss it. Dan's going to be on here. We're going to be talking about that. It's going to be a good time. But thanks for joining us today from Washington, D.C., and we'll see you next time.